this song. Why? Because we are going to rock you. And the nice thing about this song, it talks about how awesome are Americans. We are awesome people. We conquer, we consolidate, we educate, we rebuild. We are an awesome force to be dealt with. You don't want the United States against you. What's the most awesome force you can think about in the United States? It's the military. If you said the EPA, if you said the Department of Health and Human Services, if you even say NASA, where I used to work, I disagree with you. I say the most awesome force in the United States is the United States military and the people that are committed to the goals of that organization. What's the biggest challenge we have today? It's not the number of bullets, number of tanks, number of aircraft, the technology. You know what the biggest challenge we have today is? Our troops, when they come home or when they're in the service, in the field, they're killing themselves. 22 a day. To me, that's a big number. Here's my question for this segment. See if you can follow along with me and not disagree, or disagree, I want to hear you. Why do we have so many suicides of American veterans? I've heard the current president say that these veterans are the biggest threat we have to peace and security in the United States. I disagree with that. Next slide. It's a complicated chart. It does come, the data from the Department of Defense. You can see the number of self-inflicted crises, that's what they call a suicide, has increased. You see the forces, the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, for that given year, which is 2012. What's the challenge of that? We're seeing that as you look at that data set on the far left, Army is the most risky, but even 45 Marines that take their own lives, that's a challenge. All the others. Let's look at that middle graphic. Let's look at what the profile is if somebody's going to commit suicide in the military. Once they've left, 95% are male, 95% are enlisted. That means they're not an officer. 80% are white. 47% are under 25. So a lot of them go to these VA programs. 41%. That's a lot. 34% say, "Hey, look, I'm thinking about killing myself." 30% had a failed relationship. That's either a girlfriend or a wife. 20% were on prescription-type antidepressants. I talked about that. They're using either heroin or cocaine base. And 14% have previously had experience harming themselves. Look on the far right. 83% are once they're home, once they're within the United States, once we're behind the wall. Only 10% were in Iraq or Afghanistan. People say, hey, those guys are really messed up. 38% are while they're deployed. That's a challenge. Behavioral health, substance abuse, 26%. That's not as many as I thought it would have been. I would have think like 80%. And suicide, 20%. And only 26% are in combat who are dying. What does all this tell you? Is that our troops are generally going to, the ones that are going to commit suicide, they're white, they've had a failed relationship, they're in a program, it didn't work out, and some of them are on drugs. Next slide. Well, let's talk about it. The number of suicides currently have overtaken, as of 2012, the number that die in combat. What does that mean? That you actually have a better chance of living through combat, even if you come home injured, than you do dying and killing yourself at home. A lot of them that come home because we have high recovery rates. I've been in 17 VA hospitals, and you see these big, strong guys missing a leg, walking with a walker. You see these big, strong guys walking or pushing themselves in a wheelchair, or people missing arms and legs. Why? Because we have good medical care. In Vietnam, it was like 2 minutes getting them off the field in medical care. Here, it's a lot less. Afghanistan and Iraq. Next slide. Why? And this is the whole segment. I don't have any answers for you, but I want you to identify people that are in these situations, do what you can to help them, particularly if you're related to them. The number of military veterans that are committing suicide is escalating. It's not going down. The Army had 80 in 2012. I got some more recent data, but what's the challenge? The challenge is our troops are weaker mentally than they were before. Next slide. It's a little more complex on this slide, but we're talking about 2003 data, 2013, and you see the numbers are just increasing on the specific type, including the guards, the National Guards. You could be a part-time guard, but those guys are even falling apart. Here's the challenge I have as an individual, and I'd like you to think about. What's different about a modern American troop? I have a couple theories. I talked to a colonel, my partner. He's a retired U.S. Special Forces colonel. I asked him while we were on a trip, and I said, hey, why are these guys capping themselves? He said, today, the American youth is not as stable as they were during World War II. World War II, the guys were out taking care of sheep, cattle, horses. They knew how to work on a farm. They could shoot a weapon. They knew how to survive. The kids nowadays come out of playing video games into the real world. They can't handle the stress. Next slide. Let's talk about how many veterans of foreign wars are actually running around out there. I heard recently, and one of my best friends when I lived in Monterey was a B-17 pilot. He also flew the B-29. He was as solid as a rock. He died of a heart attack, but his mentality, he was from Idaho, was solid. He had 10 men under his command. We look at 7.8 million veterans of foreign wars. We're looking at 5.2 million, 2.8 million. We're looking at Vietnam, Korea, Gulf War, World War II. Many of our World War II and World War I veterans are in the 90s and 100 years old. We have 50,000 veterans from the Gulf Wars. What are we talking about? We are talking about the number of eligible veterans that could kill themselves. The number is not really as great, but our people are not as robust emotionally. Next slide. Let's particularly focus on Iraq and Afghanistan. What is going on with those veterans when they come back? We have 711,000 veteran patients of the system. Right now, the current administration has certain lists under their health care program. It's called the Do Not Treat list. And a lot of our veterans that have had any negative impact on their record is placed on that Do Not Treat list. Many of our veterans who are placed on these pharmaceutical antidepressant medications, which are, as you know, cocaine and other type of poppy-type medications, their weapons are being confiscated here in California. The county sheriff comes by, hey, you're on this list, we need all your weapons. Post-traumatic stress is something relatively new. They used to call it just battle fatigue, World War I and II. We have 211,000 of those people running around, PTSD, and we have 938,000 estimated new veteran claims by the end of 2013. That number is growing. They just give medication and send them out. This is a challenge. It's a resource-based challenge. Our current government is more, let's put it this way, socialist. They don't want to waste resources on people they feel are going to kill themselves anyway. Next slide. I want this slide to be the most important thing we talk about in this segment. What is it? That the Veterans Administration is currently estimating that 22 veterans are killing themselves every day. That's one almost every hour. One every 65 minutes is killing themselves in one way or another. Now, we've had some very famous films where veterans have tried to reach out, and they've had many tours to veterans that are undergoing these stressful conditions. One of them was actually murdered while he was trying to help the other veteran. What can we do to help? On the far left, you see a statistic that you may not believe. I want you to look it up. And that is America has been around 239 years since it was started in 1776. How many years have we been in a war, or what percentage of that time have we conscripted soldiers to go out and fight? That's why I say Americans, we are a challenging opponent. 93% of the time, or 222 years, Americans have sent out troops. Why is it that we have so many now that are committing suicide? I want you to think about that. I don't have an answer. What can you do to help? I don't have an answer for that either. I'm sending the message out. Why don't you try visiting 17 VA hospitals and talk to some of those guys? Why don't you make a friend out of a World War II vet or an Afghan vet or an Iraqi vet that's been there? And they don't just go for 1 or 2 tours. They're now there 4, 5, 6, 7 tours. So what do you think you'd feel like after 7 hand-to-hand combat tours? Recognize the signs of someone who's seriously depressed. They'll talk about it. They'll let you know. And I'll close with this statement. There are no easy answers, because once you start talking to a veteran about their experiences, that's real. It's not a video game. They're fighting for their lives, or they're in stressful situations where they're incoming rounds, or people are getting blown up. Here's what I'd like to close with this segment right now. The AME Food Safety Show is against veteran suicides. Do everything we can, including yourself out there, to stop it. And I look forward to talking to you in the next segment. Thank you very much.